Welcome to the Nonprofit Marketing Webinar Series by Williams Whittle. I'm Kelly Callahan Poe, President of Williams Whittle. We're a full-service advertising agency that works exclusively with nonprofits. This webinar series is available on demand to assist nonprofits with their branding, storytelling, and brand activation efforts. Today we have a special guest, Karen Beck. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for having me.
Karen is the founder of KB Insights. It's a marketing research firm, and her mission is to help organizations understand the voice of the customer and turn those insights into actionable branding strategies to find, win, and grow customer relationships. Karen has served as Williams Whittle Director of Research for the last 10 years. Today, we're going to talk to you about a national donor survey that we recently conducted. The year 2020 was like no other, and a lot of nonprofit organizations were heavily impacted by the pandemic and continue to be. And so we wanted to learn how the mindset of donors changed over the course of 2020, and those results are what we're going to see today. So I'm going to toss this over to Karen, and she's going to walk you through what the survey covered and our findings.
Thanks again, Kelly. As we mentioned before, we had a lot of questions from nonprofits and charities in 2020 and at the beginning of 2021 as well on the impact that the pandemic has had on giving. And this question really had several sub-questions related to it that were the genesis for our national donor study. We wanted to answer the question, have the types of charities and nonprofits the people in the United States changed? How much did they give in the past? How often? What should we expect this year and beyond? And how should we communicate with potential and existing donors in the future? What can we do right now to make an impact? With these questions in mind, we spoke with 410 US adults across the United States in November 2020. We used panel research so that we could control the profiles of respondents to make sure that they were demographically similar to the characteristics of the US population. And so as you see in the graphs here, we spoke to about half women, half men, and the age distribution and the ethnicity distribution mimic that of the US population. We were also able to control the location of the respondents, again, keeping in mind that it's important to mimic the distribution of the US population in order for us to draw conclusions about the US population. So you can see from the map here that the greatest concentration of respondents existed in states like California, Texas, Florida, New York, and the lowest concentration in states like Wyoming, Vermont, and North Dakota. So we felt pretty confident in the sample that we amassed in terms of the representation of US adults, and also with 410 completed responses, we can be 95% confident that our findings are within plus or minus 5% of true results. So that having been said, let's go ahead and dive into the results themselves. Now, the first thing we wanted to take a look at was the history of donations to nonprofits and charities. And so we asked the question right up front, have you ever donated to a charity, cause, or nonprofit organizations? And you can see that 81% did indeed give to a nonprofit or a charity in the past. Pretty decent percentage there. And among those, we wanted to find out what motivated them to donate to specific charities in the past. And you can see from the graph here that by far and away, the number one motivation to give to specific charities, looking backwards, is believing in the mission of the organization.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this insight is extremely important for nonprofits, that the mission is the motivator. And it's something that we spend a huge amount of time at Williams Whittle on, understanding the mission of an organization that we work with and in creating emotionally compelling brand story around the mission and how it impacts the people that the nonprofits that we work with serve. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later.
Yeah, absolutely, Kelly. The mission is key. But you know what else was key? It was interesting to me how often community comes up. And we've seen this in other research as well. So giving back to the community was identified by 36% of respondents in their top 3 motivators to donate in the past. So we'll save that as well, because that's an important point that we'll want to consider reaching out to potential donors in the future. Personal connection to the cause is also very important to a little bit less than a third of the respondent base. So again, something we need to keep in mind in developing our messaging. Now, 23% of folks said that they supported the same causes annually. And we're going to dive into that topic a little more thoroughly in a moment as well. But current events play a role. Certainly, religious beliefs play a role in motivating people to give. Tax deductions are also important, although that's fluctuating now, and we'll touch on that again a little bit later as well. And then some of the more infrequent but still important reasons and motivations are the recommendations from friends, compelling asks, the popularity of a charity at any given time, and advertisements as well. So, the next thing we wanted to find out after we learned about motivations is what type of organizations that people have given to in the past. Now, again, we're going to talk about the future a little bit later, but looking backwards, poverty and human services charities top the list, followed by health charities and animal charities. Now, also important are faith-based entities, community development charities, military and veterans charities, education charities, art and culture, and on down the list. But that's important for us to note so that we can sort of size the opportunities, if you will. And, with a larger body of data, we could dive even deeper into demographics and things of that nature that tend to steer toward different kinds of charities. So there are lots of opportunities for additional secondary and primary research going forward in these areas.
I think it's worth noting too that those donation types have all changed since 2019. The top two weren't necessarily there 2 years ago. So poverty and human services and healthcare have really gone up to the top. And that's reflected a lot in terms of what the media covers as well, and in terms of what PSA directors are willing to air or to have on air, because there's specific types of charities related to what's happening in the world today and current events and the pandemic that they want to support and put on air.
That's a good point. Absolutely. Now, turning to frequency of giving, in the past, the most common response was, well, I give periodically. But you can see annual donations are also quite prevalent. So over half of respondents gave annually or periodically. 14% say they gave one time to particular organizations, and less frequent weekly and monthly donations. So the next thing we wanted to find out, now that we understood sort of the frequency and the types of giving, is how many charities and nonprofits that individuals in the United States support. And the grand majority said, I support 1 to 5 charities. And you can see that about a third give more than 5 charities, but that is the most prevalent response in the 1 to 5 category.
Did this one surprise you, Karen? Because it surprised me. It seems like a little bit higher number than I anticipated.
Yeah, I think so. And there's certainly a preponderance of opportunities out there to give in today's environment. But yeah, it was a little bit surprising to me as well. The median annual giving level was $251 to $500. You can see the results here to the question, in a typical year, how much money do you donate to charities and nonprofit organizations? So that's the median, but you can see that we've got a pretty wide distribution here. It's not all concentrated sort of at the median. It is certainly spread out. So you can see that slightly less than a quarter of respondents give more than $1,000 a year, and then a similar percentage give less than $100 per year. So it really did run the gamut.
When we present this data to individual clients or we develop their own surveys, we dig a little bit deeper into the demographics of this information, because what we found in the past is that the older you are, the more likely you are to give, especially among the 65 plus, which is why you see so many nonprofits focused on the 65 plus demo. So this is relatively consistent with what we see, but notable to realize that there is a difference in age.
Absolutely. In fact, the older demographic that you mentioned moves up a rung in terms of the median annual giving level to $501 to $1,000 from the 251 to 500 range. So yeah, age does play a role, and that could be because of disposable income. It could be because of differing motivations, and we have and will continue to dive into those differences. So the next thing we wanted to dive into now that we are giving is, whether holiday time makes a difference. We asked the question, do you typically donate around a specific holiday? And it was pretty fairly split evenly. 45% said yes, they typically give around a particular holiday. And we did a little bit of common categorization here, and not surprisingly, Christmas, Thanksgiving are the two holidays around which most give. But keep in mind also that 52% said no, they don't give around a particular holiday traditionally. So there's certainly year-round opportunities. Well, that brings us to the million-dollar question. What was the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, and what are we continuing to see today? We asked the question, how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted your donations to charitable causes in 2020? Interestingly, 44% said that the pandemic had absolutely no impact on giving. But conversely, 56% said it did. And if you take a look at pie slices on the left side of this chart, it was fairly split between people who said, I will donate more this year than most, and I will donate less this year than most. So the next thing we want to do is, well, let's dive into the reasons for giving more or less, as you can see in the chart here. If you take a look at the red bars at the top of this graph, you can see that the reasons for giving more are topped by helping others experiencing financial hardship. That makes some sense given the economic impact of COVID-19. And then what also makes sense is what comes in second, which is helping others experiencing COVID-related medical issues. That was followed with sustaining the charities and nonprofits I support. So there's certainly a sensitivity to the long-term health of the charities that consumers cared about. And then 12% said I have more disposable income to give. Now, if you look at the light green bars at the bottom, you can see that the top reason for giving less is that I've been financially impacted by the pandemic and have less to give. That kind of makes sense with what we saw at the top side of this chart, doesn't it? The next most prevalent response was, I'm saving more money given economic uncertainty. And we saw a prevalence of this particular reason, particularly among older donors. Certainly the reasons differ by demographic cut. 18% said I no longer receive deductions for giving. And I mentioned that earlier when we were talking about taxes. There were a lot of shifts in personal income taxes this year in terms of deductions, itemized versus standard. And so 18% noted that as a reason for giving less. And 5% said the charities I typically support have shut down. Now, that seems like a low number on this chart, but think about it. That's actually quite a large number when you think about the number of charities and nonprofits nationwide.
And I think we can assume that this trend is going to continue into next year as well, correct? Because we're still technically in the thick of the pandemic.
For
and
sure,
the problems are still real problems.
Yeah, we're in 2021, and fingers crossed for 2022. Okay, now that we've taken a look at the past and kind of the current situation, let's look at the future of giving. When we shifted the survey to sort of the looking forward point of view, and asked the question, do you plan to donate to charity in 2021 and beyond? You can see that 67% of all respondents said, yeah, I do plan to continue to give to charity in 2021 and beyond. And, we did a little crosstab to take a look at people who had given before and people who hadn't given before. And for sure, a huge predictor of future donations are the history of giving in the past. 80% of those who said that they had given in the past said that they will continue to give in the future, whereas only 13% who had not given before said they will donate to charity in the future. Okay, and then we asked the question, do you think the kinds of charities and nonprofits you support will change in 2021 and beyond? 2/3 don't think that the kinds of charities will change, but 35%, which is a significant percentage, said, yes, I do think the charities and nonprofits you support will change in 2021 and beyond. When we delved into the kinds of organizations that donors said that they would give to in the future and contrast that to the chart I showed you earlier about the organizations that they've donated to in the past, you can see that by and large, they're pretty similar. Poverty and Human Services top the list with health charities and animal charities. Those were the top three that we looked at in a past donation slide that I showed you earlier. But what's interesting to me is that, the previous chart that I showed you about, do you think change the charities you support in the future were a third, and compare it to this chart, there seems to be a disconnect. In my opinion, I don't think necessarily donors know what they will give to in the future, but they know that their minds are somewhat open to different donations. This chart reflects, well, here's what I've done before and I'll keep doing it, but the prior chart, that minds are indeed open to different kinds of donations. Now, we talked about the kinds of charities that people will support moving forward, but we haven't talked about the relative level of support that they intend to provide. And this chart really reflects that. To which do you think you'll donate the most in 2021 and beyond? Topping the chart was faith-based entities. So while that was sort of in the middle of the charts that we looked at before, a larger proportion of the wallet, so to speak, or the donation kitty, goes to faith-based entities, followed by poverty and human services charities, which we talked about before, health charities and animal charities. Further down the list, but not insignificant, are community development charities, arts and culture charities, education charities, military and veterans charities, and environmental charities, and to a much lesser degree, NGOs. This is a very interesting slide. And Kelly, I know that you've had some interesting comments on this in the past, but let me just tell you what we found. And then Kelly, I'd love you to tell us a little bit about your experiences here. We asked, do you have a preference on donating to local, state, national, or global charities? And this, I was actually surprised at the magnitude at which people indicated that they preferred to give to local charities, 39%, so they preferred to give to local charities. 17% said they had no preference. It was the next most common response. 15% said a combination. And as you can see, as you move further and further out to state, national, and then global charities, those percentages decrease.
Yes, we do surveys every year on a similar topic. And one of the areas that we focus on is PSA campaigns, public service announcements. And what we've found with our PSA directors when we call them up and ask them to place a particular PSA for a nonprofit is they want to understand, how does this impact people in my backyard, in my market? Is it relevant to us? And so what we usually do is we try to get 5 to 10 stories for specific markets that we're trying to reach out to. Of course, you're looking at network and you're looking at cable, but on top of that, you're usually looking at maybe the top 10 DMAs. And out of those DMAs, we want to have individual stories. And so, we get that from the nonprofits that we work with. So there's an overarching message, but it gets localized so that we can say, this particular issue or concern has happened in your area, and here's a personal story of someone that had an issue and your nonprofit helped solve that particular problem. And they love getting those stories, and those stories really help turn them into becoming advocates for that particular cause and wanting to put that particular PSA on air because there is a localized approach that you've added to it. It is impossible to localize everything, but you can localize something in terms of storytelling when you're pitching a spot as well.
Absolutely, good points. Okay, then we took a look at sort of the nuts and bolts of donations. And you can see here, when we asked what the preferred method of donating, that online was selected by 50% of respondents. That's, I kind of expected that result, didn't you, Kelly? That
Yes,
online would top it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I didn't necessarily expect was the prevalence of in-person and by mail donations. What are your thoughts there?
Well, two things. On in-person, we've done a lot of one-on-ones, even recently, Karen. In the last 2 years, we've done a lot of one-on-ones with donors themselves, where we get on the phone with donors and talk to them directly about why they've given. And nearly all of them say, if I'm going to be giving a certain amount of money or a healthy amount of money that's beyond what an ordinary ask would be, I want to know the impact of that particular donation. And so they want to hear from the executive director or the head of that nonprofit on a quarterly basis. They actually want to be taken to lunch. We can't always do that these days, but they want to have some sort of in-person meet. And that's for some of the larger scale donors that we see coming across. So we cannot forget in-person as an important avenue and touch point with current and past donors and future donors. And then on the mail side, it feels like 2021, I'll officially call it, is kind of like the resurgence of direct mail. And I'm seeing more and more direct mail than I ever have. Beyond the DoorDash flyers that I get in my mail, I'm seeing a lot for a wide range of services. And then frankly, we are doing a lot more direct mail than we ever have. And that reason is because you are able to cut through the clutter in a better way than with email marketing, where, my inbox is filled with 100 of these a day. It's hard to sort through them. I usually just delete them, as do most. And so direct mail, especially if you're able to add a QR code, which we have done, then you can actually see how many people have gone to your website. And so we've had some great success with direct mail pieces. So we actually know what the value is of each particular piece once we look at those numbers. So don't forget direct mail in terms of your play, and certainly don't forget making those in-person or phone calls to potential donors.
Yeah. So in addition to the top three, there were some interesting findings here. Looks like 14% of donors said that they preferred donating with purchases. 9% said they had workplace giving programs, or 7% said they had planned giving in place in a will or trust. So there are a wide variety of donation methodologies. So we should keep an eye on those things as we move forward in the future. But as you can see, the top three are certainly online, in person, and by mail today. Corporate matching is also important, and you can see that 24% of US adults said that their employer offered corporate matched gifts, which was a bit higher than I had expected, to be honest. So that leads us to communications. How are we going to reach people on behalf of a nonprofit or charity to solidify relationships and donations going forward? We asked the question, what type of content or updates would you like to receive from the nonprofits you support? And you can see that the top response was information about participants and how they're benefiting from the program. Again, benefiting the people that they're trying to help seems to be a common focus of the past and now in the future. Information about upcoming events was also deemed important. 27% said you don't need to update me at all. A quarter said updates to their location. They have a new workroom, a new library, chairs, the sort of infrastructure changes within the organization. 23% said they were interested in a recap about past events. 19% said budget updates. Only 17% said changes in staff. So I really think about this set of results sort of from the heart of what the mission is, which we saw earlier, in terms of what are the benefits delivering, to more of the logistical and changes within the nonprofit itself. Something to keep in mind when talking about communications to your donors. How frequently do you like to hear from charities and nonprofits? You can see here that the highest bars exist in the sort of once a month, quarterly time range. A fifth said annually. So those are sort of the most common types of responses. Only 19% indicated every week or every 3 weeks. So we need to keep that in mind when determining how to provide ongoing updates to our donors. How would you like to hear from your favorite nonprofit organizations? Email topped the list, followed by mail. And again, here, Kelly mentioned earlier that there's a preponderance of email today, and so direct mail's certainly on the rise. 22% said social media, and we haven't talked a lot about social media yet. I'm going to touch on that on the next slide as well. But certainly social media is important in terms of ongoing communications, as can be text messages. 12% said they like to hear from their favorite nonprofits via text. Telephone, slightly less at 10%. Magazines, newsletters, in-person meeting and events were less as well.
I think it's interesting on this one because a lot of nonprofits focus so much time and effort on their newsletters. And to see that 6% number is probably very tough to see. Email marketing, I assume, would be outreach, outside of the newsletters. So worth kind of noting in terms of, how do you, if you're going to continue to do your newsletters, how do you do them in such a way that they're making a bigger impact so that people actually want to open them? And that's really what the message is on the cover of the newsletters. So something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people are increasingly used to sound bites like they get on social media or text messaging. So it'll be interesting to see the future of newsletters and more robust communications. I told you I would touch on social media. 36% said that they followed nonprofit organizations on social media. That was a very pleasing number to me, higher than I had expected. And that also sort of paves the way for ongoing communication opportunities that are fairly cost effective. In terms of general social media usage, Facebook topped the list, probably no big surprise there. We see that study after study. Almost 2/3 of US adults say they're using Facebook on a regular basis. That's followed by YouTube and Instagram. And a little bit further down the list, but still significant at 1/4 of the US population, is Twitter. In fact, only you can see on the next bar, only 19% say they don't use any social media on a regular basis. So the world of communications has indeed changed and arrived. Pinterest, Snapchat, LinkedIn, TikTok, all important to take a look at and monitor going forward to see what bubbles up in terms of frequency of use. In terms of donation format preferences, we talked about communications before, but what about communications when asking individuals to consider a donation? The results aren't that different than general communication, slightly different. At the top here, you can see half of US adults said that they prefer email, followed by direct mail, again, followed by social media, sort of the top three. We have some other kinds of media here for consideration when you're putting together your donation solicitation campaigns. Video, individuals were likely to respond to video as well, 14% of them. 11% said they would respond to a TV spot, 9% a phone call. Google online searches at 8%, same with radio, banner ads a little bit further down the list. So I don't know, Kelly, when you look at this, what it says to me is sort of a multimedia approach might make the most sense.
Absolutely.
Now, we've all received gifts in the mail as enticements to provide donations. We ask the question, if a charity sends you a small gift, does that encourage you to donate money to their cause? 38% said yes, 62% said no. So that's something to consider depending on your target market and your donor profiles for the future. Then we ask, well, if a friend donates to a particular charity or nonprofit, does that make it more likely you'll donate to the same organization? Here again, almost the same percentage, 39% said yes, it does influence my decision on who to donate to. So that's a significant percentage as well. How do you encourage others, friends, family, coworkers, to support the causes you care about? How does this work? How can we influence the mechanics of this referrals process? Well, the top response was, I don't encourage. The most prevalent type of response among those who do was just telling them about the charity without a specific request. So it wasn't that they're asking them to give money. It's just they're just telling them about it and sharing their experiences. Slightly lower percentage, 23%, said they do specifically ask them to donate money. So it's kind of fairly evenly split between those two kinds of behaviors. 19% said that they asked their friends and their family, coworkers, to donate unwanted, unused items like food, clothes, mattresses. So that's also a significant percentage. And we've also saw almost 1 in 5 asking others to attend a particular event that they were involved with, a fundraiser, a walk, a run. 8% said that they encouraged others to make a post on social media or use the Facebook birthday, donate to this charity type of post. So those are all things to watch as the kind of media we consume evolve. But, very simple, get the word out kinds of encouragements might be the way to focus going forward, at least initially. PSAs. Kelly talked a little bit about PSAs earlier. We asked the question, has watching a public service announcement on TV caused you to donate money to a specific organization? A third said yes. Again, I was pleasantly surprised by that number.
Yeah, not as pleased as we were, because PSA campaigns are one of the core competencies that we have at Williams-Whittle. We have a whole section on our website about PSA campaigns if you navigate to williamswhittle.com, and an entire PSA guide that talks about that. So they do work, and they are still the best way to spread a nonprofit's message to the largest possible audience for the lowest cost. So worth considering for many nonprofits.
The last question we asked was, how do you typically listen, watch, or read the news? And interestingly, 61% said that they watch TV. I don't know if that's interesting. That would be to be expected. That wasn't surprising to me. Online was next at 46% of US adults consuming the news online. That was somewhat surprising to me, a little bit higher than I expected. And then newspaper, 28%, was a bit lower than I expected. Social media is catching up to newspaper at 23% of news consumption in this format, followed by radio at 22%. And to a lesser degree, but also important, are podcasts and magazines in terms of news consumption. So again, very important to consider this mix of media when thinking about ways to deliver messages in perhaps an earned media format.
Yeah, and when we do that survey with our individual clients, we actually dig a little bit deeper into what stations are you watching, how are you accessing TV if it's not through cable television? Are you using Roku? Do you have Amazon? Do you have Hulu? We also look at digital radio versus terrestrial radio. We look at a whole range of things for the surveys that we do for our original clients, not just for this particular survey. So that data is extremely valuable because it helps with media planning. And also understanding media on things like newspapers. For example, every time we do a survey in the Washington, D.C. area, Washington Post still continues to come up as the highest read newspaper. Not a surprise, but it's still an influential medium worth considering for people who are in the Washington, D.C. area. So lots of things and lots of ways that you can cut this data.
Mm-hmm. We've covered a broad spectrum of research today about donor behaviors in the past and in the future. But what I'd like to end up with today is really an answer to the question, what can you do right now to make an impact? Let me just remind you of some of the things we've talked about today that might be starting points for your next steps. The first is to articulate your mission well based on core values shared by potential donors.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about mission early on, but a mission really needs to be a key part of your particular brand story. And we like to say that a brand story has three parts. And the first one is emotion. What is the emotion that is universally understood about your particular nonprofit? Is it love? Is it hope? Is it sorrow? Is it salvation? All these sort of things. And building a campaign around that emotion, because that's when people give, is when they're connected in some way, shape, or form through an emotional hook. The second thing is a clearly stated problem that needs to be solved. And that needs to be a part of your brand story. And the third is a way for people to get involved. Obviously, a quick way to tell them how they can support you in many different ways, whether it's not just donating, but volunteering, sharing the cause on social media, etc. So encapsulating all those three things is really important. And frequently, you're actually able to do that through a tagline. And so we do suggest sometimes adding a tagline in order to do that, to be able to get people to really grasp what the mission is of what you're trying to do and hook it emotionally. One example of this that we've done for the USO, we came up with the tagline, "Until Everyone Comes Home." And that's really to focus on the USO's job, which is to strengthen America's military service by keeping them connected with their friends and family. Another example of that is we worked with Interfaith Council of Metropolitan Washington. They seek to combat religious intolerance, and we came up with a tagline for them called "All Faiths, One Family." So there's a wide range of things that you can do in terms of storytelling. Storytelling can actually be in a video, it can be in a print ad, it can be in social media, it can be on your website, it can even be in your tagline. So making sure that those storytelling has that emotion in there and has that problem that you can solve and a way for people to get involved is extremely important.
Yep, thank you. Good points there on mission. In addition to mission, earlier we talked about the importance of community. So make potential donors feel like part of your community. It's a great way to entice donors to invite others into the same community. This really goes hand in hand with our finding that the messaging needs to be relatable at a local level. Even if you have a state, national, global type charity or nonprofit, the message has to be relatable at that local level. And that's probably because of community and the importance of community. The next thing is nuance your messaging based on the impact of COVID-19, but don't make it your sole focus.
Yeah, one of the challenges we've had in the last couple of years and continue to have is obviously a lot of spots for clients were created over the last a year and a half on COVID. And those aren't what we call evergreen, meaning you can't continue to run those forever. And so especially there's copy and text in there, the words like unprecedented times and those sort of things are in those spots. So what we're trying to do is kind of move some of our campaigns forward, still focusing on safety and the importance of safety, but trying to make sure that the campaigns that we're developing are more evergreen so that they can run moving forward post-pandemic.
Mm-hmm. The next point is to choose the right time or frequency to request donations. Consider holiday giving or annual giving, which are most common. Consider needs-based giving, but I would caution you not to over-solicit. Through all the research we do, frustrations abound when people feel like they're being bombarded with too many messages and solicitations. So I would caution you there. And then communicate with past donors beyond donation requests. You know, there should be communications, perhaps quarterly, semi-annually, about the benefit that's being delivered, not just about a donation request for additional monies provided. The next is leverage a multimedia approach to communicate with your organization's community. We looked at a lot of different media slides here today, and it's clear that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Email is certainly a powerful communications tool, but don't underestimate the importance of mail in a multimedia approach if budget allows. Consider use of PSAs and thank you gifts strategically based on your target and budget. We know that both can be effective, so should be incorporated into an overall strategy if budget permits. Next, establish a social media presence, starting with Facebook and possibly YouTube or Instagram. And we'll continue to keep an eye on the movement of some of the lesser social media platforms because things are changing quickly, as we all can appreciate. And then the last thing is consider primary research to supplement secondary research, which this study is secondary research for you all, but you can absolutely repeat these kinds of studies with potential donors in your area, with your existing donor base, or both to contrast the two, and that will provide incredible insight into how to move forward in your marketing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Karen, so much for guiding us through this very useful presentation. Tons of great insights that we hope that you find useful in your upcoming communications. If you have any questions for our team or for Karen, or if you'd like to request a meeting to review the findings of our research in greater detail, please send us a message through our contact form at williamswhittle.com, and feel free to ask us any questions and comments or specific deep dives of this particular study if you're interested in learning more. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you, Kelly, and thanks to everyone who joined.
Bye.